The lunch tray crashed to the floor, pasta sauce splattering across my sneakers like blood. Blake towered over me, his cruel laugh echoing through the cafeteria as 300 kids watched my humiliation. What they didn't know was that my dad could end Blake's entire existence with one precise shot from 800 yards away. Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment your location. My name is Ethan, and I've been carrying a secret that weighs heavier than the bruises Blake leaves on my ribs every Tuesday and Thursday after gym class. Look at this pathetic loser, Blake sneered, grinding his boot into my spilled lunch. Can't even hold a tray without shaking like a little girl. I stayed on my knees, picking up the scattered food while kids pulled out their phones. Another viral moment for Blake Morrison, the king of Roosevelt High. Another day of shame for me. My dad says your dad's probably some deadbeat who ran off, Blake continued, his voice cutting through the cafeteria noise. That's why you're such a weak piece of garbage. If only he knew. My father, Jake Coleman, spent 12 years as a Special Forces sniper. 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq. He's got 47 confirmed kills and a chest full of medals locked in a box he thinks I don't know about. The man who tucks me in at night and makes pancakes every Sunday morning once held a Taliban commander's life in his crosshairs for 6 hours straight, waiting for the perfect shot. But I can't tell anyone that. Dad made me promise. Violence doesn't solve anything, son. He told me 3 months ago when the bullying started. There are always better ways to handle conflict. Easy for him to say. He's never been shoved into lockers or had his head dunked in toilet water while kids laughed and recorded it. I gathered the last of my ruined lunch and stood up slowly. Blake's crew, 3 other wannabe tough guys who wouldn't last 5 minutes in my dad's world, formed a circle around me. Where you going, Coleman? Blake grabbed my shoulder, his fingers digging into the exact spot where he'd punched me yesterday. I'm not done talking to you. Just leave me alone, I whispered, hating how small my voice sounded. Blake's face twisted into that familiar, cruel smile. What did you say? Speak up, little mouse. The cafeteria had gone completely silent now. Even the lunch ladies had stopped serving to watch the show. My heart pounded against my ribs as Blake leaned closer, his breath hot against my ear. Your daddy ain't here to protect you, he whispered. And he never will be, because he's probably dead in some ditch somewhere like the worthless soldier trash he was. Something cold and sharp twisted in my chest. Dad wasn't dead. Dad was very much alive. And if Blake only knew what those steady hands had done overseas, what those calm eyes had seen through a sniper scope. But I bit my tongue and walked away, just like Dad taught me. That night, I sat at the dinner table picking at Mom's meatloaf while Dad asked about my day. Mom, Linda, was a nurse at the county hospital. She saw enough violence and pain in her job. She didn't need to hear about mine. School was fine. I lied, same as every day. Dad's gray eyes studied my face. At 42, he still looked like he could run 20 miles and then hit a target at 1,000 yards. His dark hair was cropped short, military style, and there was something in the way he carried himself that most people couldn't quite identify. But I knew what it was. It was the quiet confidence of a man who had stared death in the face and won, over and over again. Ethan, he said softly, you know you can tell me anything, right? I nodded and forced a smile. Yeah, Dad. I know. Later that night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my ribs aching where Blake had accidentally elbowed me in the hallway. Through the thin walls, I could hear Dad in his workshop, probably cleaning one of his hunting rifles or sharpening his knives. What Blake didn't understand, what none of them understood, was that my father had spent years learning how to neutralize threats with surgical precision. He'd been trained by the best military minds in the world to assess, plan, and eliminate problems that seemed impossible to solve. But instead of using those skills, he chose to make pancakes and help with homework and pretend that his son wasn't getting destroyed at school every single day. As I drifted off to sleep, one thought kept echoing in my mind. How long could a trained killer keep pretending to be just another suburban dad? And what would happen when that carefully controlled facade finally cracked? The bathroom mirror didn't lie. Purple bruises bloomed across my ribs like twisted flowers, and the cut on my lip had reopened during lunch. I pressed a wet paper towel against it, watching pink water swirl down the drain. Blake had outdone himself today. Please tell me you fought back. My reflection seemed to whisper. But we both knew the truth. I'd taken every punch, every kick, every humiliating word without throwing a single hit back. The bathroom door slammed open, making me jump. Blake strutted in with his usual swagger, flanked by his crew, Connor, Derek, and Matt. 3 kids who'd probably wet themselves if they ever met my father. Well, Blake drawled. Looks like little Ethan's trying to clean up his mess. I kept my head down, hoping they'd just use the bathroom and leave. But Blake wasn't done with me today. You know what your problem is, Coleman? He grabbed my shoulder and spun me around. You think you're better than everyone else. Walking around all quiet and mysterious like you've got some big secret. If only he knew how right he was. I don't think I'm better than anyone, I mumbled. Blake's hand shot out faster than I expected, slapping me across the face. The sound echoed off the bathroom tiles like a gunshot. My cheek burned, but I didn't react. Look at me when I'm talking to you. I raised my eyes to meet his. For a split second, something flickered across his face, maybe surprised that I wasn't crying or begging. But it disappeared quickly, replaced by that familiar, cruel smile. That's better, he said. Now, here's what's going to happen. You're going to bring me $50 tomorrow, or I'm going to make today look like a birthday party. I don't have $50. Blake's fist caught me in the stomach, doubling me over. As I gasped for air, he grabbed a handful of my hair and yanked my head up. Then you better find it, loser. Ask Mommy and Daddy for some lunch money. Or better yet. His grip tightened. Maybe I'll pay them a visit myself. Explain how their pathetic son needs to learn some respect. Something cold and dangerous flashed through my mind. An image of Blake knocking on our front door, not knowing that the quiet man who answered had once eliminated an entire Taliban cell with nothing but a knife and 40 minutes of darkness. But I pushed the thought away. Dad had made his choice. Peace over violence. Pancakes over precision strikes. Leave my parents out of this, I said quietly. Blake laughed and shoved me backward. My head hit the mirror with a crack, and I slumped to the floor. Through blurred vision, I watched the 4 of them file out, their laughter echoing down the hallway. I sat there for 10 minutes, waiting for the dizziness to pass. When I finally stood up, I saw that the mirror had a spider web of cracks radiating out from where my head had hit it. 7 years of bad luck, my grandmother used to say, but I was already living it. The walk home felt longer than usual. Every step sent sharp pains through my ribs, and I could taste blood where I'd bitten my tongue. When I finally reached our quiet suburban street, I paused at the mailbox, gathering the courage to face my parents. Our house looked so normal from the outside. White picket fence, flower boxes under the windows, Dad's truck in the driveway. No one would ever guess that the man who lived here had once crawled through enemy territory for 3 days straight to eliminate a high-value target. I slipped through the front door as quietly as possible, hoping to make it to my room without being seen. But Dad was waiting in the living room, sitting in his favorite armchair with a cup of coffee and yesterday's newspaper. Hey, buddy, he said without looking up. How was school? Fine. I lied, keeping my face turned away. That's good to hear. He folded the paper and set it aside. Your mom's working late at the hospital tonight, so it's just us for dinner. I was thinking we could order pizza, and he stopped mid-sentence. When I glanced over, his gray eyes were locked on my face, taking in every detail with the same intensity he'd once used to study enemy positions through a scope. Ethan. His voice had changed completely. Gone was the gentle suburban dad tone, replaced by something cold and sharp. Come here. I tried to avoid his gaze, but there was no hiding the damage Blake had done. The cut lip, the bruised cheek, the way I was holding my ribs. Dad's trained eyes missed nothing. He stood up slowly, his movements controlled and predatory. In that moment, He didn't look like a middle-aged insurance salesman. He looked exactly like what he used to be, a weapon designed by the U.S. military to eliminate threats with extreme prejudice. Who did this to you? The question came out as barely more than a whisper, but something in his tone made my blood run cold. For the first time in months, I understood why enemy combatants had feared the ghost sniper who could kill them from impossible distances. My father wasn't just angry. He was calculating trajectories. It was just an accident, Dad, I whispered, but the lie crumbled under his stare. Jake Coleman stepped closer, and I watched 12 years of careful civilian facade melt away like snow in summer. His shoulders squared into a predator's stance, his head tilted slightly, the same angle he'd once used to line up impossible shots through a rifle scope. Son, he said quietly, I've seen enough accidents to know what they look like. This isn't one of them. He reached out with surprising gentleness and tilted my chin up, examining the damage with the clinical precision of someone who'd once assessed battlefield injuries under enemy fire. His fingers traced the edge of my bruised cheek, and I saw something flicker behind his eyes, a darkness I'd never seen before. Tell me his name. It wasn't a request. Dad, please. You always said violence doesn't solve. Tell me his name, Ethan. The way he said it made my stomach clench. This wasn't my pancake-making, homework-helping father anymore. This was Sergeant J. Coleman, the ghost sniper who'd once held the record for longest confirmed kill shot in his unit. Blake Morrison, I whispered. Dad nodded once, filing the information away in whatever mental database he'd used to track enemy targets. Then he walked to the kitchen window and stared out at our peaceful suburban street, his hands clasped behind his back. How long has this been going on? 3 months. And you didn't tell me because? I swallowed hard. Because you said there were always better ways to handle conflict. Because you left all that military stuff behind when you came home. Dad was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. I did leave it behind, Ethan. I had to. Do you know what I did over there? What they trained me to do. I nodded. I'd found his metal box years ago, hidden in the back of his closet. Bronze Star, Silver Star, Purple Heart. Commendations for valor under fire. Citations for missions that were still classified. I was good at it, he continued, still staring out the window. Too good. I could put a bullet through a playing card at 800 yards. I could track a target for days without being seen. I could eliminate threats that other soldiers couldn't even get close to. He turned to face me, and for the first time I saw the weight he'd been carrying all these years. But every time I pulled that trigger, a piece of me died too. Every confirmed kill, every mission completed, it carved something out of my soul that I can never get back. Dad walked to the kitchen table and sat down heavily. When I came home, when I met your mother, when you were born, I thought I could bury that part of myself forever. I thought I could be just a regular dad in a regular town, living a regular life. You are a regular dad, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew they weren't true. No, son, I'm not. I'm a predator pretending to be a family man. I'm a weapon that learned how to make pancakes and help with math homework. But underneath all of that, he looked down at his hands, hands that had once held enemy lives between his fingers. Underneath all of that, I'm still exactly what the military made me. The kitchen fell silent except for the tick of Mom's antique clock. Outside, Mrs. Peterson was walking her dog, probably thinking about what to make for dinner. Normal suburban evening activities. But inside our house, something fundamental had shifted. The nightmares never stopped, Dad said quietly. I still wake up at 3 a.m., scanning for threats that aren't there. I still check every room before I go to bed, still plan exit strategies wherever we go. Your mother thinks it's just old habits, but it's more than that. He stood up and walked to the kitchen drawer where Mom kept the takeout menus. But instead of pulling out a pizza flyer, he reached toward the back and withdrew a small black notebook I'd never seen before. I kept records, he said, flipping through pages covered in his precise military handwriting. Every potential threat in our neighborhood. Every person who might pose a risk to my family. License plates, daily routines, weaknesses, pressure points. My blood ran cold as I realized what he was telling me. You've been watching everyone? Everyone who matters. The drunk who lives 3 houses down and drives home every night at 11:30. The teenager across the street who deals marijuana out of his bedroom window. The school board member who's been embezzling funds for 2 years. He closed the notebook and looked at me. And now I'm going to add Blake Morrison to this list. Dad, you can't. I can't what? Protect my son? Let some punk kid torture my family while I stand by and pretend to be civilized. His voice was getting harder, more controlled. That boy put his hands on you, Ethan. He hurt you. In my world, that means he's already dead. The words hung in the air like smoke from a discharged rifle. I stared at my father, this man who'd raised me with bedtime stories and birthday parties, and realized I was finally seeing who he really was underneath the carefully constructed mask. Jake Coleman, the suburban insurance salesman, had been a fiction. But Sergeant Coleman, the ghost sniper who'd eliminated 47 enemy combatants without ever being detected, he was very, very real. Dad, you're scaring me. The words slipped out before I could stop them, but they were true. Standing in our familiar kitchen, watching my father transform back into the soldier he used to be, felt like watching a stranger emerge from someone I thought I knew completely. He blinked, and for a moment the hardness in his eyes softened. I'm sorry, son. I didn't mean to. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized from countless homework sessions and bedtime talks. This is why I buried that part of myself. This is why I never wanted you to see it. But it was too late. The mask had slipped, and we both knew there was no putting it back on. The next morning at school, Blake was waiting for me at my locker. Word had spread about yesterday's bathroom incident, and kids were already pulling out their phones, hoping for another viral moment. Well, Blake sneered. Look who decided to show up. You got my money, Coleman? I shook my head, my stomach clenching with familiar dread. That's too bad. Blake grabbed my backpack and dumped everything onto the floor. Textbooks, notebooks, and pens scattered across the hallway while students gathered around us in a circle. Guess I'll have to collect it another way. His fist caught me in the kidney, sending me to my knees. As I gasped for air, trying not to vomit, Blake's voice echoed through the hallway. This is what happens when you don't pay your debts, people. Everyone remember this. Connor kicked my scattered belongings down the hall, while Derek stepped on my calculator, crushing it under his heel. Matt pulled out his phone and started recording, narrating like some sick sports commentator. And Blake Morrison delivers another beatdown to Roosevelt High's Biggest Loser. I stayed on the ground, gathering my broken things while laughter and whispers surrounded me. But as I reached for my history textbook, I noticed something that made my blood freeze. A shadow at the end of the hallway. Tall, still watching. I looked up and saw him through the crowd of students. Dad, standing by the main office doors in his work clothes, khakis and a polo shirt that made him look like any other suburban parent. But his stance was different. Predatory. Alert. He was studying Blake the way he'd once studied enemy targets through a rifle scope. Our eyes met across the crowded hallway, and he gave me the slightest nod. Then he melted back into the crowd of parents and visitors, disappearing like the ghost he'd once been on foreign battlefields. Blake was too busy showing off for his audience to notice. He grabbed my collar and hauled me to my feet, his breath hot against my ear. Tomorrow I want $100, he whispered. And if you don't have it, I'm going to make sure everyone in this school knows what a pathetic piece of garbage you really are. He shoved me backward into the lockers and walked away, his crew trailing behind him like hyenas following a lion. The crowd dispersed, already bored now that the show was over. I gathered the rest of my belongings with shaking hands, my mind racing. Dad had been here. He'd seen everything. And the look in his eyes. That afternoon, I came home to find Dad in his workshop, a converted garage space where he kept his hunting gear and tools. But today was different. Today, the workshop looked like a military planning room. Maps were spread across his workbench. Not hunting maps or hiking trails, but detailed satellite images of our town printed from Google Earth. Our neighborhood was marked with red pins, and I could see notes written in his precise military handwriting. Morrison Blake, age 16, 1247, Oakwood Drive. Single mother, works double shifts at Walmart. Father unknown, possibly incarcerated. Below that, associates, Connor Walsh, Derek Price, Matt Sullivan. All from broken homes. Pack mentality. Followers, not leaders. And at the bottom, threat assessment, escalating pattern of violence. Requires immediate intervention. Dad, I stood in the doorway, afraid to come closer. He looked up from a photo he'd been studying, a school yearbook picture of Blake that he must have gotten from the Roosevelt High website. How was school today? He asked, as if he hadn't watched me get beaten in the hallway 6 hours ago. You were there, I said quietly. Yes, I was. He set down the photo and turned to face me. I needed to see for myself, assess the situation properly. And Blake Morrison just made the biggest mistake of his short, miserable life. Dad walked to a metal cabinet I'd never seen opened before. When he turned the combination lock, I heard the soft click of heavy mechanisms disengaging. Inside were things that didn't belong in a suburban garage: night vision goggles, tactical knives, and communication equipment that looked military-grade. I made some calls today, he said, pulling out a manila folder. Old contacts from my unit. People who owe me favors. He opened the folder and showed me a stack of documents. Background checks, criminal records, financial information, all about Blake's family. Blake's mother, Angela Morrison, is 3 months behind on rent. She's got medical bills from when Blake broke his arm last year that she can't pay. She's 1 traffic ticket away from losing her license, which means losing her job. Dad's voice was clinical, detached. This was how he'd once briefed his unit before eliminating high-value targets. Blake's been in trouble before. Shoplifting, vandalism, fighting. The school's been giving him passes because they feel sorry for his home situation. But there are people watching him: social services, probation officers, school administrators. People who would be very interested to know about his escalating pattern of violence. What are you going to do? Dad closed the folder and looked at me with eyes that belonged to a different man, a dangerous man who'd once hunted human beings for a living. I'm going to remind Blake Morrison that there are predators in this world far worse than a 16-year-old bully, and that some of those predators have families to protect. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through a list of contacts I'd never seen before. Names with no last names. Numbers with international prefixes. It's time for Blake to learn that picking on the wrong kid doesn't just mean getting detention or a stern talking to from the principal. His finger hovered over a contact labeled Simply Reaper. It means becoming the target of someone who was trained to end lives from distances you can't even imagine. Dad, please don't do anything crazy, I whispered, watching him scroll through contacts that belonged to a world I'd never imagined existed in our quiet town. He looked up at me, and for a moment his expression softened. I'm not going to hurt him, Ethan, but I am going to make sure he understands that his actions have consequences. The next 48 hours felt like living in a spy movie. Dad went to work each morning like normal, kissing Mom goodbye and grabbing his coffee travel mug. But I knew he wasn't just selling insurance policies anymore. I started noticing things. Dad's truck parked in different spots around town when I walked to school. A figure in dark clothes jogging past Blake's house at dawn. A repair van with tinted windows sitting across from Roosevelt High during lunch period. He was conducting surveillance. Professional, military-grade surveillance. On Wednesday evening, I found him in the kitchen with his laptop, scrolling through social media profiles with the focused intensity of someone studying enemy intelligence. Blake Morrison, he said without looking up. 16 years old, lives with his mother Angela at 1247 Oakwood Drive. Father abandoned the family when Blake was 8. Mom works 2 jobs, day shift at Walmart, night shift cleaning office buildings. He clicked through Blake's Instagram posts, analyzing each photo like it contained military secrets. He's been acting out since his father left. Started small, talking back to teachers, skipping classes. Escalated to shoplifting when he was 13, vandalism at 14. The bullying behavior started last year when his mother lost her first job. Dad pulled up another tab showing Angela Morrison's social media. A tired-looking woman in her late 30s, posting inspirational quotes about single motherhood and working multiple jobs to make ends meet. She has no idea what her son is doing at school, Dad continued. She leaves for work at 7 a.m. and doesn't get home until midnight. Blake raises himself, which means he's learned that violence gets results because no one's there to teach him otherwise. How do you know all this? Dad's smile was cold and professional. Because I spent 3 days watching their routine. I know Angela gets coffee at the same gas station every morning at 7:15. I know Blake walks to school alone and stops at the corner store to shoplift energy drinks. I know his mother cries in her car for 5 minutes every day before going into work. He closed the laptop and pulled out a thick manila folder filled with printed documents, photographs, and handwritten notes. Connor Walsh lives with his grandmother because his parents are drug addicts. Derek Price's father is in prison for domestic violence. Matt Sullivan's been in foster care since he was 12. The clinical way Dad recited these facts made my skin crawl. This wasn't information gathering. This was target acquisition. They're all damaged kids looking for someone to follow, he said. Blake's the alpha because he's the most violent. But take him out of the equation and the whole pack falls apart. Take him out. My voice cracked. Dad, you're talking about kids. Messed up kids. But still, I'm talking about a threat to my family. His gray eyes locked onto mine. And threats need to be neutralized. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Blake. Not as the monster who'd been tormenting me, but as a scared kid whose father had abandoned him and whose mother worked herself to exhaustion just to keep a roof over their heads. But then I remembered the bathroom incident, the pain in my ribs, the humiliation in front of 300 students. Maybe Blake Morrison deserved whatever was coming for him. Thursday morning, Dad didn't go to work. Instead, he sat in his truck across from Roosevelt High, watching the parking lot through a pair of binoculars that looked way too expensive for bird watching. When Blake arrived at school, Dad was there. When Blake left for lunch, Dad followed at a distance. When Blake and his crew cornered some 7th grader behind the gym, Dad was watching from the woods, taking pictures with a telephoto lens. By Thursday evening, Dad had compiled a complete behavioral profile of Blake Morrison that would have impressed CIA analysts. Subject displays classic pack leader mentality. He read from his notes during dinner, while Mom chatted about her day at the hospital, completely unaware that her husband had spent the day conducting military reconnaissance on a 16-year-old. Escalating pattern of violence suggests increasing desperation. Home situation deteriorating. Mother missed 2 rent payments. Utilities threatened with cutoff. Subject likely feeling pressure to assert dominance as compensation for powerlessness at home. That's nice, honey, Mom said absently, passing me the mashed potatoes. Dad met my eyes across the table. Psychological pressure points identified. Ready to move to phase 2. After Mom went to bed, Dad showed me the photographs he'd taken. Blake shoving the 7th grader. Blake and his crew smoking behind the school. Blake vandalizing a teacher's car. Evidence, Dad said simply. Enough to get him expelled, arrested, or both. But that's not how we're going to handle this. What do you mean? Dad pulled out his phone and showed me a text message he'd already typed but not sent. Blake. We need to talk. Behind the school. Midnight. Come alone. A friend, you're going to meet him? I asked, my blood running cold. I'm going to introduce myself, Dad said, and explain to Blake Morrison what happens when someone hurts my family. His finger hovered over the send button. Tomorrow night, Blake learns that there are consequences in this world that go far beyond detention and parent-teacher conferences. He learns that some fathers don't just make pancakes and help with homework. He pressed send. Some fathers were trained by the United States military to eliminate threats with extreme prejudice. and Blake Morrison just became threat number one. Blake stared at the text message for the third time, his hands shaking slightly as he sat on his unmade bed. The house was empty. Mom had already left for her night shift and wouldn't be back until after sunrise. Blake, we need to talk. Behind the school. Midnight. Come alone. A friend, what kind of sick joke is this? He muttered, but something cold had settled in his stomach. Someone knew his number. Someone was watching him. He'd been getting weird feelings all week, like eyes were following him, like shadows moved when they shouldn't. Connor had laughed when Blake mentioned it, calling him paranoid. But the feeling wouldn't go away. Meanwhile, I sat in my bedroom, watching Dad make his final preparations. He'd changed into all black clothing, tactical pants, long-sleeved shirt, combat boots that made no sound when he walked. The suburban insurance salesman had vanished completely, replaced by something that belonged in a war zone. You don't have to do this, I said, but we both knew that wasn't true anymore. Dad checked his gear one final time. Night vision goggles, zip ties, a knife that looked like it could cut through bone. No gun. He'd explained that firearms left too much evidence, made too much noise. A scared 16-year-old is more dangerous than a dead one, he'd said. Dead martyrs inspire revenge. Terrified bullies just want to disappear. At 11:47 p.m., Dad's phone buzzed with a response from Blake. Who is this? How did you get this number? Dad smiled, a cold, predatory expression I'd never seen before, and typed back. Someone who's been watching you hurt innocent people. Someone who thinks it's time you learned what real fear feels like. Then, you have 10 minutes to get to the meeting spot, or I come to your house instead. Your mother works until 6 a.m., doesn't she? That's a long time to be alone. My blood went cold reading that message. Dad wasn't just threatening Blake anymore. He was playing psychological warfare games that could traumatize a kid for life. But when I thought about the bathroom incident, about Blake's fist connecting with my ribs, about 3 months of daily humiliation, maybe Blake Morrison needed to understand what real fear felt like. At 11:58 p.m., Dad left the house through the back door, moving with the silent efficiency of someone who'd once infiltrated enemy camps without being detected. I watched from my bedroom window as he disappeared into the darkness like smoke. Blake was already at the school, hiding behind the dumpsters and checking his phone every 30 seconds. He'd brought a baseball bat, his idea of protection, but his hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold it. The school parking lot was empty except for security lights casting long shadows across the asphalt. Blake kept looking over his shoulder, jumping at every sound, his bravado from the hallways completely gone. At exactly midnight, Dad's voice came from the darkness behind him. Blake Morrison. Blake spun around, raising the bat, but saw nothing. Just empty parking lot and shifting shadows. Who's there? His voice cracked like a little kid's. Show yourself. Drop the bat. The voice came from a different direction now, left side, maybe 20 feet away. Blake whirled toward the sound, but again found nothing. I said drop it. This time the voice was directly behind him. Blake spun around so fast he almost fell, swinging the bat wildly at empty air. His breathing was getting faster, more panicked. Please, he whispered. I don't know what you want. I don't know who you are. But I know who you are, Blake. Dad stepped out of the shadows about 10 feet away, close enough to be seen, but far enough to stay safe. I know everything about you. In the dim security lighting, Dad looked like something from Blake's worst nightmares. Tall, silent, dressed in black, his face partially hidden by shadow. He moved with the controlled grace of a predator, never making a sound. Blake raised the bat with both hands, trying to look threatening. Stay back. I'm warning you. You're warning me? Dad's laugh was soft and terrifying. Blake, I've been watching you for a week. I know you stop at Miller's Corner Store every morning and steal energy drinks. I know you smoke behind the gym during fourth period. I know you've been beating up a kid named Ethan Coleman. Blake's face went white. How do you? I know your mother works 2 jobs to pay rent on that little house on Oakwood Drive. I know she doesn't get home until dawn. I know you're all alone right now, just like you are every night. Dad took a step closer, and Blake stumbled backward. I know about Connor Walsh and Derek Price and Matt Sullivan. I know where they live, where they go to school, what time they walk home. I know everything about everyone you care about. What do you want? Blake's voice was barely a whisper now. Dad stopped moving and stood perfectly still, letting the silence stretch until Blake was trembling with fear. I want you to understand something very important, Dad said finally. Ethan Coleman is under my protection now, and people who hurt things I protect, they disappear. Blake dropped the bat. It clattered against the asphalt, echoing across the empty parking lot. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered. I never hurt anyone named. Don't lie to me, Blake. Dad's voice dropped to almost a whisper, but somehow became more terrifying. I was there Tuesday when you beat him in the bathroom. I watched you humiliate him in front of 300 students. I have photographs of every bruise you've put on his body. Dad pulled out his phone and showed Blake a crystal clear image of him shoving me into the lockers. Digital evidence of assault and battery. More than enough to get you arrested, expelled, and sent to juvenile detention. But I'm not going to call the police, Blake. Blake was crying now, tears running down his cheeks as he realized how completely trapped he was. I'm going to handle this myself. Blake wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, trying to stop the tears, but they kept coming. Standing in that empty parking lot, faced with a man who seemed to know his every secret, he felt smaller than he'd ever felt in his life. Please, he whispered. I'm sorry. I'll leave Ethan alone, I promise. I'll never touch him again. Dad circled him slowly, like a wolf studying wounded prey. Oh, Blake, you think this is about promises? You think this is about saying sorry and everything goes back to normal? I mean it, Blake said desperately. I won't bully anyone anymore. I'll be good, I swear. You'll be good. Dad stopped circling and faced Blake directly. Tell me something. When Ethan Coleman begged you to stop, did you listen? When he promised to bring you money, when he tried to avoid you in the hallways, when he never fought back, did any of that make you show mercy? Blake's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. No words came out. That's what I thought. Dad pulled out his phone again and scrolled through more photos. This is from Monday, you dumping his lunch tray. This is from Wednesday, you and your friends cornering him by the lockers. This is from today, you kicking a 7th grader behind the gym. Each photo was crystal clear, professionally shot from angles that proved Dad had been watching everything. You see, Blake, you've established a pattern. A pattern of choosing victims who can't fight back, who won't tell on you, who suffer in silence while you build your reputation on their pain. Dad put the phone away and stepped closer. Blake tried to back up, but stumbled over his own feet. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to learn what it feels like to be hunted, to be watched, to never know when the predator is coming for you. I don't understand, Blake stammered. Starting tomorrow, you're going to feel eyes on you everywhere you go. In the hallways, walking to school, sitting in your house alone at night. You're going to wonder if that shadow moved, if that car has been following you, if the footsteps behind you are just coincidence. Dad's voice was hypnotic, terrifying. You're going to check your phone and find messages from numbers you don't recognize. You're going to see things moved in your room, evidence that someone was there while you slept. You're going to realize that your safe spaces aren't safe anymore. You can't do this, Blake whispered. This is stalking. This is illegal. Dad laughed, a sound that made Blake flinch. Illegal? Like beating up kids half your size? Like stealing from convenience stores? Like vandalizing school property? He pulled out a manila folder thick with documents. I have enough evidence to destroy your life, Blake. Criminal charges, school expulsion, social services investigations. Your mother would lose her jobs dealing with the scandal. You'd end up in juvenile detention with kids who make you look like a choir boy. Blake was shaking now, his tough guy facade completely shattered. But I'm not going to do any of that, Dad continued. Instead, I'm going to teach you a lesson about consequences. About what happens when you pick on someone whose family actually cares enough to fight back. Dad reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device, a GPS tracker, the kind used for hunting or surveillance. "This is going on your backpack tomorrow morning while you're in first period," he said casually. "I'll know everywhere you go, everyone you talk to, every move you make. If you try to remove it, if you tell anyone about it, if you even think about retaliating against Ethan." He let the threat hang in the air. "Your mother gets home at 6:15 a.m. every morning. She makes coffee, checks the mail, then showers before going to bed. She sleeps until noon, then gets up and goes to her day job at Walmart. She has no idea that her son is a violent predator who terrorizes innocent kids." Blake's face went dead white. "Don't you dare involve my mother. Your mother is already involved, Blake. She raised you. She failed to teach you right from wrong. She's working 2 jobs to support a son who repays her sacrifice by becoming everything that's wrong with this world." Dad stepped even closer, and Blake could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle that didn't match the terrifying situation. "But here's the beautiful part," Dad whispered. "I don't have to tell her anything. Because you're going to change all by yourself. You're going to stop bullying. You're going to leave Ethan alone. You're going to become a model student." "Why would I do that?" Dad smiled, and it was the most frightening expression Blake had ever seen. "Because if you don't, I'm going to make you disappear." The words hung in the cold night air like a death sentence. "Not kill you, Blake. That would be too easy, too quick. I'm going to make you irrelevant, invisible. I'm going to systematically destroy every relationship, every opportunity, every chance at happiness you might ever have. Your friends will abandon you. Girls will avoid you. Teachers will give up on you. Your mother will be so ashamed she'll wish she'd never had you." Blake was crying openly now, tears and snot running down his face. "And the whole time, you'll know that somewhere out there, someone is watching. Someone who could end your pathetic little life anytime he wanted to, but chooses to let you live with the knowledge that you're completely powerless." Dad checked his watch. "It's 12:17 a.m. You have exactly 3 minutes to get home before I decide you're not taking this seriously enough." Blake turned and ran, stumbling across the parking lot, leaving his baseball bat behind. Dad watched him go, then picked up the bat and examined it like he was considering adding it to his collection of trophies. But the lesson wasn't over. It was just beginning. Blake didn't sleep that night. Every shadow outside his bedroom window looked like a figure watching him. Every creak of the old house sounded like footsteps. When his alarm went off at 7 a.m., he was already dressed and sitting on his bed, staring at the door. The walk to school felt like a death march. Every car that passed could be the mysterious man from last night. Every person on the sidewalk might be watching him. Blake's head swiveled constantly, checking behind him, scanning rooftops, jumping at his own shadow. But the real terror began during first period math class. Blake was trying to focus on algebraic equations when he felt something brush against his backpack. He spun around, but saw nothing unusual, just classmates taking notes and Mrs. Henderson writing on the whiteboard. During passing period, he checked his backpack obsessively. Everything looked normal, but somehow it felt different. Heavier, like something had been added. By lunchtime, Blake was a nervous wreck. He sat alone at his usual table. Connor, Derek, and Matt had all tried to talk to him, but he'd snapped at them to leave him alone. He couldn't risk getting his friends involved in whatever nightmare he'd stumbled into. That's when he saw me walking through the cafeteria with my lunch tray. For 3 months, this had been Blake's favorite moment of the day. The chance to humiliate me in front of hundreds of students, to assert his dominance, to feel powerful when everything else in his life felt out of control. But today was different. Today, Blake looked at me and saw something that made his stomach clench with fear. I wasn't walking with my usual defeated posture. My head was up, my shoulders straight. And when our eyes met across the crowded cafeteria, I smiled. Not a friendly smile. Not a scared smile. A knowing smile. Blake's hand started shaking so badly, he dropped his sandwich. Because in that moment, He realized the truth that had been staring him in the face all along. The mysterious man who'd terrorized him last night. The professional stalker who knew his every secret. The predator who'd promised to make him disappear. It was my father. Blake pushed back from the table so fast his chair fell over. Other students turned to stare, but he didn't care. He stumbled toward the exit, his vision blurring with panic. I followed him. Not aggressively, not obviously, just walking in the same direction, maintaining the same distance, like we were both heading to the same place by coincidence. Blake glanced back and saw me trailing him. He broke into a run. I kept walking at the same steady pace. Blake burst through the school's front doors and kept running until he reached the parking lot where he'd been confronted 12 hours earlier. Only then did he stop, gasping for air, and turn around. I was standing about 20 feet away, hands in my pockets, looking completely calm. "You figured it out?" I said quietly. Blake's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He looked like he was about to faint. "My dad's been gone since 6 a.m. I continued, stepping closer. "He's at work, selling insurance policies and pretending to be a normal suburban father. But you and I both know he's not normal, don't we, Blake?" "Your father?" Blake's voice was barely a whisper. "That man last night was your father." I nodded. "Jake Coleman. Retired Special Forces. 47 confirmed kills. He could eliminate you from 800 yards away and never lose a minute of sleep." Blake stumbled backward. "You can't prove that. No one will believe you." I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo I'd taken that morning. Dad loading his surveillance equipment into the trunk of his car, dressed in his work clothes, but surrounded by military-grade gear. "I don't need to prove anything to anyone else," I said. "I just need you to understand that everything changed last night." The balance of power shifted completely. Blake was crying again, but this time it was different. This wasn't fear, it was despair. The crushing realization that he'd picked a fight with someone whose family actually had the skills and resources to end him. "For 3 months, you made my life hell," I continued. "You beat me up, humiliated me, stole from me, threatened me. And the whole time, you thought I was helpless. You thought I was just some weak kid with no one to protect him." I stepped closer, and Blake flinched. "But here's what you never understood, Blake. My dad didn't raise me to be weak. He raised me to be patient. He taught me that violence is the last resort, that there are always better ways to solve problems." "I'm sorry," Blake whispered. "I'm so sorry. I'll never touch you again, I swear." "Oh, I know you won't," I said. "Because now you understand what happens to people who hurt Jake Coleman's family. Now you know that every move you make is being watched by someone who was trained to kill people like you before you even knew people like him existed." Blake looked around the empty parking lot like he was searching for escape routes. But there was nowhere to run. "What do you want?" he asked desperately. I studied his face, the same face that had sneered at me every day for 3 months, that had laughed while I cleaned up my spilled lunch, that had smiled while his friends recorded my humiliation. "I want you to remember this feeling," I said finally. "This helplessness, this fear, this knowledge that someone bigger and stronger than you can destroy your life anytime they want to." Blake nodded frantically. "I'll remember. I promise I'll remember." "Good." I turned to walk back toward the school, then paused. "Oh, and Blake, my dad wanted me to give you a message." Blake's face went white. "What message?" I smiled the same cold smile I'd inherited from my father. "Welcome to the rest of your life." 3 weeks passed in a strange new reality that none of us could have imagined. Blake Morrison had become a ghost of his former self. The swaggering bully who'd once commanded fear and respect throughout Roosevelt High had been replaced by a nervous, jumpy kid who flinched at sudden noises and constantly looked over his shoulder. He'd stopped bullying everyone, not just me, but the 7th graders, the quiet kids, even the teachers he used to mouth off to. Connor, Derek, and Matt had tried to understand what happened to their leader, but Blake wouldn't explain. He just mumbled excuses and avoided them whenever possible. The GPS tracker Dad had mentioned turned out to be psychological warfare rather than reality. Blake spent hours each day searching his backpack, his locker, his bedroom, convinced he was being monitored. The paranoia was eating him alive. But it was working. For the first time in months, I could walk through school without fear. I could eat lunch in peace, use the bathroom without checking for ambushes, focus on my classes instead of constantly watching for danger. Dad had won. His enemy had been neutralized without a single act of physical violence. So why did I feel so empty? The answer came on a Thursday afternoon when I found Blake sitting alone behind the school, in the same spot where he used to smoke with his crew. He was crying, not the terrified sobs from that night in the parking lot, but quiet, defeated tears that spoke of something deeper than fear. He looked up when he heard my footsteps and immediately tensed, ready to run. But something in my expression must have told him I wasn't there to gloat. "Please," he whispered. "I haven't done anything wrong. I've been good, just like he said. I haven't bothered anyone." I sat down on the concrete steps about 10 feet away from him, close enough to talk, but far enough to not seem threatening. "I know," I said quietly. We sat in silence for a few minutes. Two kids who'd been enemies for months, but were now connected by something neither of us fully understood. "Your dad," Blake said finally. "He's really—" "Yeah, he really is." Blake wiped his eyes with his sleeve. "I keep thinking he's going to come back. That this is all just the beginning and he's planning something worse." "He's not," I said, and realized I meant it. Dad doesn't make empty threats, but he also doesn't waste energy on neutralized targets. You're not a threat anymore, so you're not on his radar. Then why do I still feel like he's watching me? I studied Blake's face, really looked at him for the first time in months. Without the cruel smile and aggressive posture, he looked younger than 16. Scared, lost, broken. "Because you're not afraid of my dad anymore," I said slowly, understanding it as I spoke. "You're afraid of yourself. You're afraid of what you were becoming." Blake's eyes widened. "What do you mean? Before my dad intervened, where were you heading, Blake? Where does a kid who beats up smaller kids and steals from stores and threatens people end up?" The question hung in the air between us. We both knew the answer. "Prison," Blake whispered. "Or dead. Or both." "My dad didn't just stop you from bullying me," I continued. "He stopped you from destroying your own life. He showed you what it looks like when someone with real power decides you're a problem that needs to be solved." Blake was quiet for a long moment. "Your dad could have just called the police. Or the school. Or my mom. Why did he?" "Because none of that would have worked," I said. "You'd have gotten suspended, maybe expelled. But you wouldn't have understood why it was wrong. You'd have just gotten angry and found someone else to take it out on. So he terrorized me instead. He showed you consequences," I corrected. "Real consequences from someone who had the power to follow through. Someone who cared enough about his family to become the monster you needed him to be." Blake looked out across the empty football field, processing what I'd said. "I hate him," he said quietly. "I hate your dad for what he did to me. I know. But I also—" He struggled with the words. "I think he might have saved my life." We sat in silence again, watching clouds move across the late afternoon sky. "Blake," I said finally, "what's your mom like? I mean really like." His face softened for the first time since I'd known him. "She's amazing. She works 2 jobs to keep us fed and housed. She never complains, never asks for anything. When I was little, she used to read to me every night before bed, even when she was exhausted." "She doesn't know about the bullying?" Blake shook his head. "She doesn't know about any of it. The shoplifting, the vandalism, the fighting. I've been lying to her for 2 years, letting her think I'm this good kid who just happens to struggle in school." "Why?" "Because she has enough problems without knowing her son is a piece of garbage." The pain in his voice was raw, honest. For the first time, I saw Blake Morrison not as my tormentor, but as a scared kid who'd lost his way and didn't know how to find it again. "You're not garbage," I said. Blake laughed bitterly. "Your dad would disagree." "My dad stopped a threat," I said. "But he also saw something worth saving, or he would have just destroyed you completely. He could have gotten you arrested, expelled, sent to juvenile detention. Instead, He gave you a chance to change. Some chance. I'm terrified to leave my house. Then don't leave it, I said, standing up. Stay home with your mom. Help her with the bills instead of adding to her problems. Be the son she thinks you are instead of the predator you were becoming. I started walking back toward the school, then turned around. Blake, my dad's not watching you anymore. But I am. And if you ever go back to being what you were, if you ever hurt another innocent person, I'll let the threat hang unfinished, just like Dad had taught me. Blake nodded, understanding perfectly. The balance of power had shifted again. But this time, it felt like the beginning of something better instead of just the end of something terrible. 6 months later, I stood in the same spot where Blake used to corner me by the lockers, but everything had changed. The hallways that once felt like a war zone now felt like what they were supposed to be. Just a school where kids learned and grew and figured out who they wanted to become. Blake Morrison was still there, but he was different. Quieter. More thoughtful. He'd started tutoring younger kids in math, something that shocked everyone who knew his reputation. His grades had improved dramatically, and teachers who'd once dreaded having him in class now praised his focus and dedication. But the most surprising change was between Blake and me. It started small. A nod in the hallway. A quiet sorry when he accidentally bumped into me. Then, gradually, something that looked almost like respect. One afternoon in late spring, I was walking home alone when a group of older kids from the next town over cornered me behind the gas station. They were looking for trouble, maybe some easy money, definitely someone smaller than them to push around. Hey, rich boy, the leader sneered, eyeing my new backpack. Let's see what you got in there. I was calculating escape routes when a voice came from behind them. Is there a problem here? Blake stepped out of the shadows, and I almost didn't recognize him. He'd grown 3 inches and put on 20 pounds of muscle, not the soft bulk of someone who just ate too much, but the lean strength of someone who'd been working out seriously. His shoulders were broader, his stance more confident, but his voice was calm and controlled. This doesn't concern you, the leader said, but I could hear uncertainty creeping in. Actually, it does. Blake moved closer, and something in his body language made all 3 older kids take a step back. See, Ethan's under my protection now. So if you have a problem with him, you have a problem with me. The leader looked Blake up and down, trying to decide if this was a fight worth having. Whatever he saw in Blake's eyes convinced him it wasn't. Whatever, man. We were just leaving anyway. They walked away, muttering threats they didn't mean, and I was left alone with the boy who'd terrorized me for 3 months. Thanks, I said quietly. Blake nodded. Your dad taught me something important that night. What's that? That protecting people is what makes you strong. Hurting them just makes you weak. We walked together for a few blocks in comfortable silence before Blake spoke again. I never told you about my father, he said. You don't have to. No, I want to. Blake stopped walking and turned to face me. He left when I was 8. Just packed a bag one day and drove away. Never called, never wrote, never sent birthday cards or Christmas presents. Just gone. I waited for him to continue. For years, I thought it was my fault. That I wasn't good enough, wasn't strong enough, wasn't worth staying for. So I decided I'd make myself worth fearing instead. If people couldn't love me, at least they'd respect me. Blake kicked at a loose stone on the sidewalk. But your dad showed me what a real father looks like. Someone who'd go to war for his kid. Someone who'd become a monster if that's what it took to protect his family. Dad's not a monster, I said. Maybe not to you. But to me that night. Blake shuddered at the memory. He was the scariest thing I'd ever encountered. And you know what the weird part is? What? I was jealous. Even while he was terrorizing me, part of me was thinking, this is what it looks like when someone loves you enough to fight for you. We reached the corner where our paths diverged. Blake toward the small house on Oakwood Drive, me toward our suburban neighborhood with its white picket fences and perfect lawns. Blake, I said as he turned to leave, what are you going to do after graduation? He smiled, the first genuine smile I'd ever seen from him. Community college first, then maybe transfer to a 4-year school. I'm thinking about social work. helping kids who are heading down the same path I was. That's good, I said. That's really good. Yeah, well, Blake shrugged. I figure I owe the universe some good karma after all the damage I did. That evening at dinner, I told Dad about the incident behind the gas station. He listened without interrupting, his gray eyes thoughtful. Blake stood up for you, he asked when I finished. Yeah, it was unexpected. Dad set down his fork and looked at me seriously. Son, do you remember what I told you about violence being the last resort? I nodded. Sometimes the threat of violence is enough to prevent actual violence. Sometimes showing someone what real consequences look like teaches them to make better choices. And sometimes, he paused, choosing his words carefully. Sometimes breaking someone down completely is the only way to help them build themselves back up into something better. Do you think Blake is better now? Dad smiled. Not the cold, predatory smile I'd seen that night in his workshop, but the warm, proud smile of a father watching his son grow up. I think Blake Morrison learned something that night that most people never learn, he said. That actions have consequences. That choices matter. That the person you decide to be today determines the person you'll be tomorrow. And what about me? What did I learn? Dad reached across the table and squeezed my shoulder. You learned that family protects family. That sometimes the right choice isn't the easy choice. And that real strength isn't about hurting people. It's about having the power to hurt them and choosing not to. Later that night, I found Dad in his workshop, but it looked different than it had 6 months ago. The maps and surveillance photos were gone, replaced by normal garage stuff, tools, hunting gear, Mom's gardening supplies. The military equipment had been locked away again, hopefully for good. Dad, I stood in the doorway, not sure how to ask what I was thinking. What's on your mind, buddy? Do you ever regret it? What you did to Blake? Dad was quiet for a long moment, cleaning a hunting rifle that probably hadn't been fired in months. Regret is the wrong word, he said finally. I did what needed to be done to protect my family. But I also helped the kid who was destroying himself learn how to be better. That's not something to regret. But you scared him. Really scared him. Yes, I did. And maybe that's what it took to get through to him. Maybe fear was the only language Blake Morrison understood at that point in his life. Dad set down the rifle and turned to face me. Ethan, in Special Forces, we had a saying, sometimes you have to be the villain in someone else's story to be the hero in your own. I became Blake's villain so I could remain your father. 6 months later, at Roosevelt High's graduation ceremony, I watched Blake Morrison walk across the stage to accept his diploma. His mother was in the front row, crying tears of pride and relief. He'd finished the year with a 3.8 GPA and a full scholarship to the state university. As he shook the principal's hand, Blake looked out into the crowd and found my family. For just a moment, his eyes met Dad's. Blake nodded once, a gesture of understanding, maybe even gratitude. Dad nodded back, and I realized that sometimes the most important lessons aren't taught in classrooms or learned from textbooks. Sometimes they're taught in empty parking lots at midnight by fathers who love their children enough to become whatever they need to be to keep them safe. Blake Morrison had picked the wrong kid to mess with. But in the end, that might have been the best mistake he ever made.